Now, I know because you listen to this show, you love Chicago. In fact, you probably know your community very well. Maybe you're involved in a block club or some other neighborhood organization because you're passionate about the place you live. Well, you might be able to turn that passion into a profession, helping others find neighborhoods that they love with a career in real estate. When you earn your license with Realtors Real Estate School, you'll have access to a community of real estate professionals who can offer guidance and mentorship. Learn how you can get started this summer. Visit realtorsrealestateschool.com/begin. Today on CityCast Chicago, new arrivals are facing stiff opposition in finding work in the city. Governor Pritzker calls for a downstate sheriff to resign, and the Bud Billiken Parade is turning 95. Helping me break it all down, City Bureau senior reporter Sarah Conway and freelance investigative journalist Sebastian Hidalgo. It's Friday, August 9th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. Morning, my friends. We got a City Bureau duo in the house today. Sarah, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
We're always happy to have you here with us. And Sebastian, thank you for joining us for the first time on the podcast.
Thank you, Jacoby. I really appreciate it.
Hey, if you are also new to CityCast Chicago, every single week we like to bring in these amazing voices from across the city to learn about the stories that they're working on, that they're following, the ones that are important to them. But like every single episode, we always go in with some good news. But before we get into the big stories, earlier this week we published an episode about getaway opportunities from the city, road trips, places we like to get to when we need to escape the city. I know with the DNC coming up, some people are like, you know what, that's when I'm going to take a vacation. I know last week with Lala here, that's when people got out the city. So Sarah, when you need to disconnect, get away, is there somewhere close or within a few hours that you like to go outside the city?
Yes, I have been going since I was a small child to Starved Rock to do hiking. I think it's a perfect spot, especially the foliage in the fall, the leaves. It's really family friendly. You go and you just see lots of folks, especially with little children, doing the hikes. And it's always nice to see a very small waterfall, like see the river, the trees. I highly recommend Starved Rock.
Mm-hmm. It's out near Oglesby, Illinois. And depending on where you're coming from, for me, it's about like an hour and 40. It might be less than that, depending on where you are in the city. But I've been out there a few times. Great hikes. I don't know, maybe growing up, I didn't think there were waterfalls or even just like some place to see even a small waterfall nearby. But to go out there, it has been cool in the last few years to experience it. Sebastian, what about you? What's a favorite of yours?
Oh, the list is growing and growing and growing in recent days. But I think the most recent one was a trip to Sleeping Bear Dunes in Michigan. I feel like it's a 5-hour drive north. That has one of the most beautiful sunsets, and the lights turn purple and orange and all sorts of colors just waking up in the morning or in the evenings, and I go back to that place.
I love that y'all brought the nature vibe. I was saying in the episode, I personally like getting outside, like nature, but growing up on the south side of Chicago, I still got a love for big cities. And so the episode has a lot of great big cities, but there are also some nature options. And so along with these two, I think people got a growing list. This year, City Bureau has been documenting the barriers, obstacles that new arrivals face when they're trying to secure work in Chicago, the various ways they face exploitation, how xenophobia and racism plague the entire journey. Recently, y'all dropped a 6-month investigation into the treatment day laborers and migrants face on the Southwest side. Sarah, before we get into this investigation, let me start with you in this entire series. Why is and was it important for City Bureau to launch this series?
We spent a lot of time going out, talking to folks who are living in city shelters, and it was quickly identified to us as a reporting team that the number one priority of people is work. Finding a pathway to having work authorization, finding jobs, being able to make money quickly, because oftentimes we found in interviews with recent arrivals that many people come to Chicago with significant debt. Folks still are sending remittances to their families, oftentimes in Venezuela or, other countries in South America like Colombia. So they have family oftentimes and children who are dependent on them. And, there's a limited amount of time that people can stay in the city-run shelters. But we found in initial conversations that people were struggling to get work authorization. They oftentimes said that, they felt that discriminated against for jobs because they are recent arrivals. And then we found that where people were finding jobs was often as day laborers, going to Home Depot parking lots oftentimes. It's a place that has historically served as a open air kind of contractor labor market. This is not a new thing. And when we dug a little bit deeper into that, it was quickly identified to us that there was an issue around labor exploitation happening. People would identify to us that they felt that they were being exploited, and that was being, paid under minimum wage. Sometimes people having you work jobs and never getting paid at all. And from there, Sebastian Ildago, who, wrote this amazing investigation as part of his City Bureau fellowship, started going out to Home Depot parking lots and talking to day laborers. And it became obvious very quickly that there was something going on with police off-duty Chicago Police Department harassment in those parking lots. So that was, I think, the seed for what became a story that is now a federal lawsuit, alleging conspiracy between the city of Chicago, the Chicago Police Department, Home Depot, and individual known and unknown off-duty Chicago Police Department officers and Home Depot security personnel.
As Sarah pointed out, part of our engagement method was to talk to as many people as possible, and heading over to the Home Depots just to kind of hear people out, ask deeper questions, and make sure that, we were looking at the right things here. One of those conversations was with a professor at UIC, Nick Theodore, who I was kind of looking into the history of day laborers. And there was a subtle comment that he had shared with me that was pretty fascinating, which was criminal trespassing being the law primarily used to deter migrant communities away from XYZ. I wanted to double check if this was happening here in Chicago, and what the investigation found was absolutely it was, and it increased significantly in the past couple of months. From 2002 to 2022, there was only a 1.4 average, but the last couple of months from 2023 to May, the number of criminal trespassing arrests increased by 16 times. So that was a significant number for us to kind of consider here. And then with that number, we started talking to people about their experiences being arrested at the Home Depot. And, there were a couple of people that had detailed alleged beatings inside the store itself by, off-duty police officers working as security personnel at the store.
I think that something that is really important about the federal lawsuit, which was filed on Tuesday, is that, there are these accusations of mistreatment, which are, everything from verbal abuse that's very focused on people's perceived race, ethnicity, country of origin, to, people, day laborers claiming that they have been physically assaulted very violently in a room within the Home Depot, which is the Western Boulevard Home Depot, located near the borders of New City, Back of the Yards, and Brighton Park neighborhoods. Criminal trespassing enforcement has skyrocketed there since August 2023, and that's from a City Bureau analysis of Chicago Police Department data. A total of 31 arrests took place there from 2002 to 2022, which was about like 1.4 arrests per year. However, in 2023, Sebastian found through his data analysis that 24 arrests had taken place, which is a really significant increase of criminal trespassing arrests. That aligns with, the arrival of people coming from Texas to Chicago. One of the things that we found in our analysis of Chicago Police Department data is that 85% of those arrests were for Venezuelans. The lawsuit is alleging, as well as, people who have experienced this at the Home Depot, that there is really a selective enforcement of criminal trespassing happening there that's really targeting specifically Venezuelan day laborers. So I think a big part of this lawsuit and its significance is people feeling that they are being targeted because of their country of origin, their perceived nationality.
I mean, based on you all's reporting, how significant of a lawsuit is this? And by that I also mean, like, how likely is it that there'll be some action taken?
This is a pretty significant lawsuit. It has named a couple of day laborers and a couple of defendants in the suit itself. And we usually see cases where, there is a group of worker center organizations or labor right organizations that are protesting an ordinance. We see that in California, we see that in Texas, and all sorts of places. However, this is to say that this federal lawsuit is pretty historic, and it involves a lot of day laborers. And I don't think that we've seen something like this in recent history in the city of Chicago. So depending on how that goes, I'm pretty sure that people will find some type of resolution for it, but that's too early to tell for now.
Again, for people who want to read this entire investigation and dive deeper into the series, please check out our show notes and continue to follow City Bureau. What's up, y'all? I'm back with another Ravinia Roundup. Yes, another one, and I got more shows. All summer long, North America's longest running outdoor music festival is putting on some of the most enjoyable concerts in the Chicago area, point blank, period. And trust me, there is something for everybody. August probably has my favorite run of shows of this entire summer. They got Grammy winners all month long, y'all, with Robert Glasper and Chicago's own Jay Ivey on August 14th, The Roots with Diggable Planets and Arrested Development on August 24th, and they've got some excited Ravinia debuts with Gaelic Storm and the High Kings on August 22nd. I know, that's a lot of names, a lot of dates. Go to the link in our show notes for the full schedule. Remember, you can grab a pavilion seat or pack a lunch for the lawn. Either way, your ride on the Metro is free with your ticket. So pick your concert, buy tickets at ravinia.org, and treat yourself. Grab yourself some wine. Do it big when you go out there. Once again, that's ravinia.org. Sebastian, I want to stay with you. Earlier this week, Governor Pritzker made a call for a Sangamon sheriff to resign following his deputy brutally killing Sonia Massey in her home just a little over a month ago. Can you remind people of Sonia's story and also what Pritzker's asking of Sheriff Jack Campbell?
Yeah, sure. So, in July, Sean Grayson was the sheriff deputy that responded to a 911 call. And the officer had shot and killed her. And, the deputy in question is, he has a track record of being in the Army, but not being in the Army for drunk driving. And there's questions around, like, how did this person get hired when he's been, in and out of police departments for years.
6 jobs in 4 years.
Right. So Governor Pritzker had called on the sheriff's department, calling for his resignation over the handling of the incident itself. And it doesn't sound like the sheriff is looking to go anywhere, but there is conversations around, what a hiring procedure could look like in the future, which could involve the entire state.
Yeah, this story, as it continues to unfold, it really flies in the face of reform effort conversations and this attempt for law enforcement, for government officials, asking for us to have patience and to have hope that reform is possible. Because when you read this story, there's a failure at all levels. Not only is there a failure in the fact that Sonia called the police to her home looking for assistance just to be gunned down, but then we look further into the story and you see that this is a person who shouldn't have been hired to begin with, which makes you question the hiring process. They've already received reviews saying that they don't have adequate training, that they've had disciplinary problems. And now you have a sheriff who is sort of framing this as we were all betrayed. You know, we were all hurting here, not as much as the family, but we're all hurting. So in a way, trying to just isolate this officer as if we are not all aware of the systemic problem this represents, that we've had to watch brutal body cam footage time and time again. And so, again, even with the governor calling for the sheriff to step down and them seemingly rejecting that call, it only makes you feel less and less hope in these so-called reform efforts.
I guess for some people, it's easy to forget when we're focusing on the police officer that there is a 36-year-old who was shot and killed in her own home, who had her hands up. This is somebody whose life got taken away prematurely, right? And that's the tragedy here.
Sarah, we have to bring in you for another conversation around police, but here we're talking specifically about Chicago police and the forthcoming DNC, as our colleague Corley J over at The Tribe got some information about how DNC security funding is going to be spread around. Can you kind of break down these numbers for us?
So Corley J at The Tribe had a really excellent article this week that, is about Chicago police are going to get the bulk of the $75 million in DNC security funds. One of the big parts of the budget breakdown that Corley was able to get from the Office of Budget and Management through a records request is that the document states that $26.7 million of the Department of Justice funds for federal security funding to Chicago are actually going to be spent on personnel. And that of that, 17.6 million are going to CPD for personnel, and that includes operation and training, as well as regular and overtime pay. So, there's about a third of that budget. It's like 35% of the 75 million are going to be spent on personnel, and a lot of that is going to go to CPD. I think a really significant thing, there's been a lot of conversations around non-Chicago Police Department, I guess police from outside of the city, potentially outside of the state, coming to also provide security for the DNC. And there's a lot of conversations around how, that may impact people who are pretty worried, I believe, about, out-of-town officers patrolling as security during the DNC.
Yeah, and as you read through the reporting, we talking like tens of millions of dollars in redacted information for consultants and new assets for the city, new tech and equipment and supplies. I mean, for a police department that already has a huge chunk of the city budget pie, to see just a week ahead of the DNC that there is still a lack of transparency around the DNC security plan, that there's still a lack of transparency on how funding is going to be used. Again, I mean, this is hugely important. Like, large swaths of around McCormick Place and United Center are going to be shut down to even the people who live there to be able to move through freely. You have outside agency, as you point out, Sarah, coming in. They say many of these officers will be patrolling inside of the security perimeter. But as we saw at the RNC, where 5 Ohio police officers gunned down Samuel Sharp Jr., a Milwaukee man who was living in an encampment near the RNC. Another instance where a black person is gunned down by police, and we're still not given as much information as we can have around what that protocol is going to look like in the city, has people even more heightened going into this event, because we know we're not just dealing with CPD. We're also dealing with a number of other personnel and agencies going into this convention.
You have a really good point. One of, I think, the points in the story that really stuck with me was towards the end of July, CPD Superintendent Larry Snelling said that most police agencies providing officers for the DNC are going to be in Illinois. And he said some would be out of state. But then we have, journalists from the Tribune and the Chicago Reader who have sent records requests to actually find out how many out-of-town officers are going to come to the city and where are they coming from. And CPD has denied those FOIAs. And so I think that there is, like, to your point, there's a lack of transparency on the part of the Chicago Police Department. Like, that information is not being shared publicly before the DNC. And, there's a lot of concern about people who live near these spaces. You're totally right. They've shut down large swaths of those area and they're within the security perimeter. And then there's also like the question that people have of like, where are these out of town police officers going to be coming from?
Again, we will drop links to all of these stories in our show notes from our friends over at City Bureau, from our colleagues over at The Tribe. Every single episode, we love to end with some good news. Just something positive, nothing to overshadow the important stories we talked about today, but we also want to give people some events they can look forward to, maybe something positive happening in our own life, something we're looking forward to this weekend. Sebastian, I want to start with you. What is your good news today?
I have to shout out my friend here who had her first international museum solo exhibition in Mexico. Yvette Mayorga, was a dear friend of mine and super proud of her.
Hey, I appreciate you for that. Sarah, what about you? What is your some good news?
Exciting because I believe they just are practicing around my house right now, but the Bud Billiken Parade is coming this weekend. It's the 95th annual Bud Billiken Parade. It starts at 10 a.m. on Saturday. Historic event. So I think that that's some good news.
The Bud Billiken Parade, as Sarah says, has been going on since 1929. The Bud has been a huge part of my life, my entire family's life. I've been going for not only the last 30 years, but especially the last 4 years, and have always had a good time. So if people want to pull up, I will drop a link in the show notes for that as well. And then before we get out of here, I've got two pieces of good news. One is built on a story we did earlier this week. We covered the fallout from the Schuler Scholarship Program fiasco. Essentially, this family who had been sponsoring a scholarship fund for largely Black and brown students from the South and West Side has suddenly ended the program. Well, luckily, some former staffers reached out to us and let us know that they've put together an initiative to raise money for some of the students whose healthcare and tuition coverage was quickly taken away just a few months ago. So we will drop a link in the show notes for that. And then one more piece of good news. Yesterday, right before we started recording, it was announced that the White Sox have fired their manager, Pedro Griffel. This is coming right after the Sox broke a historic 21-game losing streak. If people have been listening to the podcast for a few years, y'all know I'm a White Sox fan. I've been wearing my White Sox jersey proudly around the city, around the country the last few weeks, but I've been very silent on the podcast if we have been having the worst season in the history of the White Sox, one of the worst seasons in the history of baseball. But it's a good news because, hey, when these things happen, somebody got to go. They've been cleaning the house of players, cleaning the house of executives. So it was only a matter of time until the coach was fired. It's not a lot of good news, but hey, it's something. It's something. We beat the streak and we didn't have to go against the Cubs with a historic losing streak. That would have only been more painful for me personally. And so, hey, the streak is over. I mean, we did start another losing streak since we lost again, but hey, it's not as bad as 21. In the meantime, in between time, I just want to give another huge round of thank yous and applause to our guests today. I appreciate all of the work you all do and all of the work you and your colleagues do over at City Bureau. So again, to senior reporter Sarah Conway. Sarah, thank you for making time for us.
Thank you for having us on, Jacoby. We love CityCast. It's always a pleasure to be here.
And to freelance investigative journalist and photojournalist Sebastian Hidalgo, it was nice to have you on for the first time, my friend.
Thank you, Jacoby. It was a pleasure being here.
Of course, I can't go without thanking the entire CityCast Chicago team. Our executive producer is Simone Alicea. Our producer is Michelle Navarro. Our Hey Chicago newsletter editor is Sydney Madden. Roving producer Elizabeth Kama. The music we all love is from Sam Thousand, All the Kimonos, and Mark Greenberg from the Mayfair Workshop. Hey, if you enjoy the show, please share us with your friends and family. Rate the show, leave us a review wherever you listen, and subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago. We're going to be back bright and early on Monday. We'll talk to you then. Peace.
So, Jacoby, I somehow have a marching band going past my house right now. I don't know how that happened.
That's not like an baby marching band. Either they full regalia.
Yes, I'm not sure what's going on or where they came from.